American history.
So 11 minutes, 1,100 rounds. Could have been much worse. He had about 10,000 unspent rounds, multiple other weapons that he didn't even fire. Kind of interesting note about Stephen Paddock is that he was a relatively mindful gun owner before 2016. He had about 8 weapons, handguns, hunting rifles, things like that, no assault rifles or anything. From 2016 to 2017, he purchased 55 assault rifles during that time. Also purchased more than 100 assault weapon gear, expanded rounds, bump stocks, etc. So, we can have an entire class on, why that wasn't flagged, but we'll just go on through the lessons learned and some of the challenges that we had. It's really kind of changed the mindset of how we respond to a mass casualty incident. What we've always been taught in the past is everybody goes to the scene, we sift and sort, we take people to the local area hospitals that make sense, and we go from there. When you have 22,000 adult individuals flee the event and go to area hospitals at their own command, it kind of changes the structure of things. So Route 90 Festival is a large outdoor festival. It's 17.5 acres of usable space. It's used for multiple outdoor events. This is an overview of the Las Vegas Boulevard. Who has been to Las Vegas? Yeah, I figured that with all the college kids here. So there's the Mandalay Bay. Venue's right across the street. You can see the command post at Station 11. It's kind of important because it wasn't in range of the weapons or any gunfire, so we were able to operate command out of that fairly safely. Those fuel tanks, as you can see there were spent rounds in the fuel tanks. He purchased a .308 magazine, which has 1,000 meters of effective range. And he was trying to shoot out those fuel tanks to hopefully get them ignite and maybe keep people on the fairgrounds. This is a picture of inside the fairgrounds prior to the shooting, and you can see the Mandalay Bay right up behind there. It's actually a pretty relatively close proximity. Blueprint of the event. There's your medical tent. Really, when you think about these events and setting up a medical tent, this medical tent was set up just like any other medical tent was in prior years. It had Band-Aids, had 4x4s, it had maybe some tools to resuscitate one sick patient, but definitely not the number of victims that we saw. That's the Metro Command Post. Next slide is Engine 11. This is the first engine that was able to witness what was going on.
Dispatch, Engine 11.
Engine 11.
Dispatch, you got a large crowd running from the music festival down here. Do you have reports of anything? It sounds like gunfire.
That's a negative, sir.
Overview from the Mandalay Bay. The yellow is the effective range of a .223 or like an AR-15 is what we call it. It's about 800 meters, and the red is the effective range of a .308 rifle. And this really kind of shows when we go through the slides later is a lot of these people were in danger and they didn't even know they were in danger. In fact, a lot of the crews, police, and EMS agencies were also in danger as well. And if you get motion sick, I apologize. You see the fuel tanks there. This kind of shows where the command post is. That's Las Vegas Boulevard there. All right, so more than 800 patients. Most of the patients were treated in Nevada. However, people transported and self-transported themselves back to California, Texas, and Arizona. 422 people were shot, over 500 total gunshot wounds. 58 people were killed. 13 area hospitals responded. More than 250 patients transported themselves to local area hospitals. Again, this kind of changes the way we are now preparing and going to be responding in the future. Most of these people egressed northeast towards my hospital, which is Sunrise Hospital, where we took care of 260 patients. 212, 215 were actually registered. And there was multiple resources, community ambulance, MedicWest, AMR, about 161 fire department personnel also responded that evening. Just to honor the other fire departments that helped us that night. I'm not going to busy you guys with that slide, but that is a pretty huge fire department response. Over 161 individual firefighters were on scene. So 9 hours and 27 minutes on task, over 15 hours of dispatch that we had to go through. So challenges for first responders, victim egress. So egress means, the victims didn't stay in one place. They went from, the 17.5 acre to what you'll see about a 4 square mile area. And then distraction calls. Who's here heard of the Mumbai, India attack or Mumbai style attack? That's what we thought we were dealing with. It's basically somebody attacks one area that's highly populated, people go to other areas where other attackers are there to attack them there, and then the final destination is they attack the hospitals. So 17.5 acres expanded into about 3.5 square miles very quickly. We've got some cell phone footage that will show you how that expanded. Just to show the velocity of the egress of the patients, this is some traffic from Engine 32.
Command, Engine 32.
Engine 32, you have a division supervisor. What do you need?
En route to my division chief, we've been flagged down. We have a victim shot in the neck in front of Hooters. I need an ambulance here, please.
Copy that.
Make that 3 ambulances total. I have 3 total gunshot wound victims in front of Hooters. Command, Engine 32.
Engine 32.
Yeah, Chief, I have a total of 6 gunshot wound victims here. I have 1 patient that's been brought up that is 419 in the vehicle. We're going to need Metro to secure the scene. We're going to need 2 additional fire department units and a total of 6 ambulances.
So Engine 32 was on their way to their collection point, and basically their collection point came to them. I mean, that traffic was about 2 minutes of time. It went from 1 victim to 3 victims to 6 victims, and then, we stopped recording at that point. The next slide is going to basically show an overview of the concert, and it correlates with the dispatch and the traffic from Las Vegas Metro Police Department. It kind of shows actually the area and what was being assaulted, as well as the aggression of patients, and kind of the timeline of the shooting.
16910 means we got shots fired 4:15 a.m. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Somewhere at 16910, we have shot fired.
What's that?
Correct. Shots fired from Mandalay Bay. There's many people down. Stage left. Just be advised.
CP, I need eyes. Somebody in the CP, can you tell me where it's coming from? From Mandalay Bay.
See right up there in the corner, that's engine 11. That was what you guys were hearing before.
former strike team, Mandalay Bay and the Boulevard. I need 5 officers on me. We have multiple casualties. GSWs in the medical tent. Multiple casualties.
Control, be advised, shots are coming from gate 7. Gate 7, shots are coming from gate 7.
All right, so this is a actual cell phone from that night, and it's basically 22,000 people that were there. Kind of packed all of the cell phones in one area, but that's 17.5 acre area. This is when the shooting started. You can see the Tropicana Hotel up here. This is Las Vegas Boulevard, Mandalay Bay here. You can see how it expanded pretty rapidly. And then the final expansion footage all the way down here on South Las Vegas Boulevard. There are people on the runway. They break through the barriers of the runway. They had to shut down the tarmac for about 30 minutes to an hour. The executive hangar is right here. We'll get to a slide there. It's actually kind of interesting, but this is the largest crime scene since 9/11, since the Twin Towers. So could you imagine how difficult it was for our law enforcement and fire department personnel to manage this? The number of victims, most of them were on stage left. Some of the victims later expired outside of the fairgrounds. Some of the victims expired on their way to local hospitals. So this is Sheldon Adelson. Everybody know who Sheldon Adelson is? Rich right-winger from Las Vegas. So this is his jet. He has multiple jets. So the patrons actually went into his hangar. The doors on this jet were open, and a handful of the cowboys went into the jet and proceeded to drink every single ounce of alcohol that was on the jet. So I don't blame them. So distraction calls. This is Mumbai, India. This is actually what happened there. This is what we thought was happening in Las Vegas that night. I know that when I got there, I was paged. I got in my car, basically was listening to the radio, and it was saying 2 people dead, multiple injured. So I thought this was going to be a normal Friday or Saturday night in Las Vegas. As soon as I showed up, saw multiple ambulances, Ubers, trucks in the ambulance bay, knew that this night was much different. Walked into the emergency department, saw multiple people with multiple gunshot wounds all over the emergency department, and there's no way I thought one person could have done this. The next thing turned to the security of my staff and the hospital to make sure that we were safe, that this wouldn't be a Mumbai-style attack. But these are distraction calls that happened for about an hour after the initial event. And the distraction calls, you guys can understand. You guys saw how people ran out and kind of went all over the valley. People would run into their casino screaming and yelling, sometimes with blood on themselves. And so if you were just sitting there and you saw somebody run in, say, I've been shot, or somebody's shooting, it's going to create a distraction call. However, we didn't know that. We thought this was the real deal.
North Division, go ahead.
Hey, Chief, we're getting reports from bystanders that they saw somebody go into an RV directly across the street from where we're at, wearing fatigues and a black duffel bag.
Lion 6, be advised, we're getting reports on Mandalay Bay, the top of Mandalay Bay at the bar. We currently have another active shooter up there. Have reports that there's an active shooter at New York, and shots heard from Hooters.
We have reports of active shooters now at Hakkasan and New York. I have not confirmed that.
Also getting reports that shots are being fired at MGM as well. Shots fired MGM. We now have report of an active shooter at the Tropicana.
Command from North Branch Emergency Traffic. We have people on the roof of the Tropicana, at least 2 people on the roof of the Tropicana.
Emergency traffic, shots fired in the Tropicana.
Command from North Branch, we're getting people evacuating out of the Excalibur, reporting that there's a fire in there. Chief Blackburn's receiving reports of shots fired in the Planet Hollywood, and I see strobes going off inside of the Mandalay. But Chief Blackburn just came in here. He's reporting shots fired at Caesars now.
Be advised, we are currently receiving reports of an active shooter at McCarran Airport. Repeat, active shooter at McCarran Airport. And be advised, we're getting reports on the 34th floor of Mandalay Bay. There's been an explosion, and the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th floor on fire.
Command, we just had a backpack show up unattended right where EMS branch is set up at Alibaba and Giles. We're relocating from the area.
Command operations. Also, we're getting reports of hostages being held currently at New York, New York.
Emergency traffic, Force Protection 6 is reporting shots fired at the New York, New York.
Crazy, right? I mean, being live during that and hearing what was going on, we thought this was it. And, this is kind of, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department and pre-hospital agencies, the hospitals. We practice in malls, we practice in schools, we practice in kind of confined areas. Something so difficult to prepare for, but this unfortunately could be the possible new reality. So our response or our challenges from our first responders, patient egress, inability to establish real collection zones, practicing basically in a hot environment. You saw the effective range of his weapons. If you were to basically just aimed at one of those police or fire engines, those engines were actually in a hot zone. And then distraction calls. Each one of those distraction calls, we have a MACTAC or a rescue task force that we had to send out to each one of those. Hospital response, the physicians here that you see here, trauma surgeons, general surgeons, surgical residents, pediatric surgeons. We used at Sunrise Hospital pretty much every type of surgical asset you could possibly imagine, and if it wasn't for the teamwork of the nurses, physicians, ancillary staff that evening, a lot of people would have perished. So our issues were the same thing, was patient egress. People drove themselves to the hospital, so this was a high velocity event. Preparing for influx of patients. How do you prepare your emergency department or your hospital when you could potentially get 260 shooting victims? A lot of them were gravely injured. And triage. How do you triage something so rapidly? I mean, when we practice these MCIs, it's 20, 30. It's easy to triage 20 to 30 of them, but when 200 of them get dropped on your doorstep, it's very difficult to triage them and put them in the appropriate spaces. Crisis standards of care. What did we do that night that we don't do any other time during the day? So there's a lot of things that the Joint Commission or CMS or the government for hospital and patient safety that we do on a daily matter. We pretty much had to completely override those processes in order to deliver efficient and fast, effective care. And then our lessons learned. So we have 2 trauma centers in Las Vegas, University Medical Center, which is a level 1, which is like the highest level of trauma center. This is Sunrise Hospital. This is my hospital. That's a level 2 trauma center. Desert Springs Hospital is not a trauma center. And it will kind of make sense of how and why Sunrise Hospital, Desert Springs Hospital saw a lot of patients that evening because of the self-transport route. Again, overview, event. Most of the people went northeast up to Maryland Parkway and to Sunrise Hospital. So if you use Siri, who uses Siri? Okay. It takes you to Desert Springs Hospital. Desert Springs Hospital is not a trauma center. If you use Google Maps, it takes you to Sunrise Hospital, which is a level 2 trauma center. So who uses Google Maps? Okay, you guys were probably going to live because you went to a trauma center. Just kidding. So just kind of, it's weird, right? Because a lot of these people weren't from Las Vegas, so they didn't know what hospital to go to. They just typed it in. They didn't type in trauma center. They typed in an emergency department, which makes total sense. But the guys over at Desert Springs did a fantastic job with what they normally do not see every night. We'll just quickly go through the area hospitals that saw patients. So 13 area hospitals saw patients. This is a Valley Health System. Again, this is Desert Springs Hospital. They're not a trauma center. They do not have the trauma resources or capability as we do. Dignity Health Community Hospital. They do have a level 3 trauma center. They took care of about 58 patients that evening. This is the level 1 trauma center. Even though they only saw 104 patients, a couple reasons why is the police department blocked off I-15, which is a direct route from the incident to University Medical Center. So that kind of limited the number of self-transports they received. However, since they didn't receive a lot of patients that evening, they took every single one of the transfers out from non-trauma centers and helped us in that manner. And this is my hospital system. You see Sunrise Hospital, so 212 patients. That's kind of like the real number. However, people didn't wait to get registered or verified or anything like that. They got bandaged, treated, and were sent on their way. So 16 hospitals in the area, 13 participated in this. 639 patients were treated. The amazing thing, only 14 people who arrived at the area hospitals died. So that is a testament to our healthcare system, our healthcare workers, and the hard work that they did that night. So 14 people that arrived to area hospitals alive, only 14 of them died. So a lot of people arrived very gravely injured, but we were able to save quite a bit. So it's a huge save percentage. So this is Sunrise Hospital. You guys are way too young to know the movie Casino. Who knows the movie Casino? So Sunrise, Las Vegas was basically founded by the mob, right? I mean, I think everybody knows that. This hospital in particular was where the mafia used to live. So this was self-funded by the mafia. So there's tunnels underneath the hospital that people could bring victims in or mobs in, and in order to deliver some care. We are building a new emergency tower right over here. And so when they were digging up this, mob-funded parking lot, there was quite a few bodies that were found. So just joking, but could be. There was a time capsule. We thought it was like, some mafia time capsule, but it wasn't. But it used to be in an affluent area. Now it's a level 2 trauma center in a very rough neighborhood. Very busy emergency department, 115,000 adult-only visits per year. So that's a pretty humming emergency department. We see a lot of high-level acuity trauma. This is just the leads of our departments. Demographics, 212 patients. So unidentified patients. This was an issue because, everybody's been to an event to where you weren't allowed to bring your backpack or your purse or anything like that. Well, that happened here, so we had difficulty because a lot of people didn't have any ID. So we had to ID them on tattoos, what they were wearing, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, it stressed the registration process. If nobody has any ID, we put them in as a trauma Bob or a trauma Debbie or whatever. Well, that was a process that we used prior to October 1st. Now we use the no identification system to where it doesn't repeat itself. We'd have to go through about 2,000 victims before it repeated itself. However, we saw a lot of trauma Bobs and a lot of trauma Debbies, so medical error can happen when that occurs. So 64 admissions, 31 patients to the ICU. So those 31 patients were extremely critical. We did 20 plus surgeries in the first basically 10 hours of this event. These are life-saving, we would call salvage surgeries. And the only reason why we're able to do this, and think of this if you go into medicine, medicine is a sacrifice, and a ton of people sacrifice their own safety to come in and take care of these folks. So we had 100 physicians and nurse practitioners arrive just at this hospital alone, and over 200 nurses and ancillary staff. So what do you do to your emergency department to prepare for an influx of patients? Well, I talk about lessons learned. Well, we really lucked out. This was not flu season. We didn't have a bunch of holding patients in the emergency department. Our ER was relatively empty. But you still have to prepare. So we cohorted all of our active patients to one area of our emergency department. So we had some real estate to take care of the patients that were coming in, moved all admitted patients upstairs, moved all of our psych. We do take care of a lot of drunk people in Las Vegas for some reason. I'm not sure, probably because the drinks are like this big. And who knows what AMA is? So against medical advice, right? This is, your patient in room 12 is leaving AMA doc, and everybody's like, whatever, sure, fine, leave. So it really, that's kind of what happened. People sat around and they were cohorted in a certain area, then all of a sudden we had to take over that area, and they saw that people were shot, and this was a huge event, and they realized that their diarrhea just wasn't that bad. I don't know if somebody's my joke gonna even land on this crowd, maybe. We'll see. Except one guy. So I'm running around the emergency department. I see this guy limping around. It doesn't look like he's a concert goer. And I was like, sir, have you been shot? How can I help you? Have you been shot? How can I help you? And he said, no, doc, a shopping cart hit my leg. And I was like, unless the shopping cart shot your leg, you can get out of my ER. I left out the F word on purpose. Friendly, yeah, my friendly ER. This is my team enjoying some cocktails about a week after the event, celebrating this, coming together as a group, sharing stories. Mental health is part of taking care of each other, just like Jason said. Number one, take care of the patient. Number two, take care of each other. Timeline of events. 22-25, we saw our first private vehicle. So when you look at the 800 people that were injured, close to 70% of those patients transported themselves to the area hospitals. That's a big issue. I mean, that's something that, we in Las Vegas has changed what we do and how we respond. 22-29, our first ambulance, and when you talk about ambulances, if you were not critically injured, it was an ambulance with 5 or 6 people in it. Administrator on call. Triaging and creating real estate in your emergency department was hugely important. We had 4 neurosurgeons that showed up that evening. We had anesthesiologists, cardiothoracic surgeons. Getting somebody from the emergency department to the ICU in an hour on a normal regular day, it does not happen. So what we did is anybody who had a GSW to the head was isolated, their airway was protected, they were hemodynamically unstable, they didn't need to go to the operating room, they went directly upstairs and they were cared for by our neurosurgeons. Same kind of thing with any chest, abdomen wounds. If they were stabilized, they didn't need to go to a surgical asset right away. We transported them directly upstairs to be cared for by our anesthesiologist and our pulmonary critical care team, which is completely unheard of, and it's something that's never been written down before. Code triage is basically, MCI. First 5 surgeries were done about 2 hours after the incident. So 100 physicians, 200 ancillary services, ancillary staff. We had pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons doing cardiothoracic surgery on adult patients and pediatric surgeons doing exploratory laparotomy. Somebody gets shot in the belly, open them up, clamp the bleeding, stop the bleeding, move on. That's something that is pretty crazy because a lot of those folks have not touched an adult patient in 15 to 20 years. This is our census. Hospital medicine, integral part of creating space was creating discharges upstairs. So our hospital medicine colleagues discharged about 180 patients in the first 24 hours. And we actually returned to normal ER operations at 11 a.m. So kind of what we do in the ER, right? So 56 surgeries basically in the first 24 hours. This just shows the velocity and the speed of which the patients came in, not only just to our hospital, but every hospital, but this is the data from our hospital. This is per minute. This is number of patients. So you can see in the first hour how many patients we received. So 124 gunshot wounds, 58 surgeons first 24 hours. We saw 10 patients that came in with DOA, or when we'll talk about triage and a mass casualty incident. So those are patients that were dead on arrival. 4 were deemed unsalvageable. 1 died intraoperatively, and 1 later died of brain death. So only 16 patients of basically the 260 patients that came in died at our hospital. So it's an unbelievable save rate. So how familiar is everybody with MCI triage? So mass casualty triage is you by severity illness. So whether you have seconds or minutes before you die, if you have seconds or minutes before you die, you're triaged as a triage level red. If you have minute to hour before you die, you're triaged as a triage level yellow. If you're walking wounded, you're as a green. So we triage and we cohort you in different areas. Typically, before this happened, we would triage you outside, we would put a tag on you, then you'd go to your appropriate area. But with the velocity of this event, we were not able to put tags on anybody, so we basically cordoned off the emergency department. Trauma center, station 1 was the red station. Station 2 and Station 4 was the yellow station, and then our ambulatory care areas moved from the south end of the emergency department into the pediatric ED space, expanded into the post-operative care unit and elsewhere in the ground floor of the emergency department. So we had to think really fast of where we were going to put these patients, how were we going to treat them. The red patients and the yellow patients needed to be the patients that were closer to our surgical assets. This is just an example of the tape. So black is deceased. So this was another change. Most of the time, if you have somebody that is brought to your hospital that is already deceased, they don't go inside the emergency department. They get left out in your triage area. However, it gets changed when somebody's loved one is in the same vehicle or somebody brought their own friend or family member that was there. So we brought every single one of the deceased back, had a second look by a physician, and then pronounced them at that time. Blueprint of the ER. This is the adult ER. Trauma bays are over here. Station 2, Station 4, ambulatory care area, Peds ER, PACU. So we expanded into that entire area. Running operations that evening, I'm not a big runner, and we did not have a good communication system, so I needed a radio. So that's kind of one lessons learned, is you have to have the ability to be able to communicate not only with everybody in the hospital, but with your staff directly. Walk-in entrance and ambulance entrance is in the same area. Trauma area, Station 2, Station 4. So these are the ones that were dying. These are the ones that probably needed to go to the OR, had life-saving interventions. Station 2 and Station 4, those patients needed airway control. So a tube put down their throat, put them on a ventilator. A lot of them needed to have chest tubes for a collapsed lung or things like that. But they didn't need to go directly to the OR. But part of treating trauma victims and doing it during an MCI is you always have to over-triage. So you're always reassessing your patients because at any given time, a patient that is in the yellow category can start bleeding out and go into the red category. So identification of those patients. And it was fairly easy because of the number of physicians and nurse practitioners that we had. We deployed 50 crash carts. These stars here were where our supply were brought in. And so we have a planned basically surge every single year in Las Vegas. Who wants to guess the date? So New Year's Eve. So we see tons more patients on New Year's Eve. So the supply cart was brought in, and we were running out of stuff left and right, so we thought this was going to be the greatest thing in the world. So we ripped open the supply cart, knowing that this is the New Year's Eve supply cart, and it had vomit bags and normal saline. So we have since changed what our surge cart looks like. Again, reinforcing kind of the way that we triaged our patients upstairs into the ICU as well as into the PACU area. We had multiple GSWs to the extremities that needed to go to the operating room, but they didn't need to go to the operating room emergently. So we put them into the pre-op and the PACU holding area. This is probably one of the only pictures that I've seen of Sunrise Hospital, and this was very early on during that evening. Patients everywhere. God bless our environmental services agency that had to clean up this stuff. So crisis standards of care. This is the stuff that we had to do and figure out during this event that we don't do on a regular basis. So everything in the hospital is done basically on a computer. So an x-ray is taken on a computer, it's generated by a computer order, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have time for that. We had multiple people that needed x-rays. So our chief of radiology just followed an x-ray machine. Everybody has seen an x-ray machine? Followed an x-ray machine around with a Sharpie and wrote the results on the patient as we got the results. Orthopedic surgeons, our orthopedic colleagues came in, they did all of their own work, their HPs, they admitted their own patients. They didn't bother the trauma surgeons like they would do on a normal day. Neurosurgeons, so we discussed that, dedicated neurosurgery to the ICU. For those of you who are going into medicine, just remember this, neurosurgeons usually are not that easy to find, okay? We saw 4 of them that night come in. So blood bank, giving blood in a hospital for a good reason is there's a lot of safety measures and safety checks, but when you have multiple people that needed blood products and need blood products fast, our blood bank released 2 buckets of blood. One bucket of blood was an O negative bucket, another bucket was an O positive. You give O negative to female trauma victims, O positive to male trauma victims. So we were able to get those blood and blood products into those patients pretty rapidly. Just by doing that, that broke a lot of rules. But the goal here is, unfortunately, when we have Orlando and we have Parkland, we have Las Vegas, is trying to create what is a crisis standard of care. How do we go from normal operating procedures to procedures to where we can fast and effectively treat our patients? The Pyxis, it's a machine that holds drugs, right? So, we needed to free up certain medications to give to patients in a rapid fashion, as well as pain medications. And so our ED pharmacist just brought down every single amount of medications that we need, and we put those in our pockets so we didn't have any delays given to those patients. Ventilators, everybody knows what a ventilator is. So it's basically a breathing machine. You typically only put one patient on a breathing machine, but we had to put 2 patients on a breathing machine. So I may be talking a little bit over your head. So tidal volume is basically the amount of air that needs to be blown into a normal adult human body for a breath, right? So what we did is we just put it on an H or a T system and doubled the tidal volume. So myself and you are a little bit more my size. I was going to pick on Jason. You could put us on the same vent, right? And you just double the tidal volume and it delivers the same basically breath. If you put a gigantic fat person and a real skinny person on the same vent, the skinny person's probably going to blow up. Not really, but it'll cause lung damage. So we were lucky because we had 2 area hospitals that were sister hospitals. So anything that we ran out of, we were able to get to in about 15 to 20 minutes. We ran out of chest tubes. So these are tubes that you could put in somebody's chest for a collapsed lung or blood in the lungs or anything like that. So we improvised and adapted and used endotracheal tubes that go down your throat. We ran out of chest tube trays. So we ended up just using one scalpel and some instruments from a laceration tray. Laryngoscopes, the tool that you use to put people on a ventilator, we ran out of those, so unfortunately we had to reuse that. Level 1 transfuser, this is a machine that's able to give large amounts of volume really fast. We ran out of those, but we were able to get those in from our local HCA partners. I won't go through too much of this slide. I think just kind of right here, the Mumbai style attack. So we had great engagement with our security folks and our local law enforcement to kind of cordon off the area and make sure that we were practicing in a very safe environment. Crisis counselors were on site 24 to 48 hours later. Nutritional teams, when we talk about nutritional teams, the community, and you guys have seen this all throughout this country, the community, when tragedy happens, really reaches out to that tragedy. And, we had things, pizza, burritos, water donated, that a room this size is kind of what we used. I mean, the thing started looking like a Costco. So we had to slow things down, had a sign-up sheet and organize that, but we didn't know, we didn't know that this was going to happen. All right, so, how did we prepare? Well, we really didn't prepare to this scale of an event, but we've had, Las Vegas is a busy place, so we surge every year into the PACU on New Year's Eve. We had a smoke inhalation incident on the airport that we were able to see 30 to 35 patients, and that actually happened during flu season, so that's a different challenge in and of itself. It came down to great timing, good physician engagement, good nursing engagement, and good communication with our bed flow and supply management. You guys won't get that, so I'll just skip that. All right, so lessons learned. So we talked about these pretty much during the lecture. I needed a communication system. I ended up walking or running way too much, so a simple radio would have sufficed. Documentation, computers break when they see a high, large volume, so you have to have some sort of hybrid system in order to take care of and manage that. We talked about the NOAA identification system for our registration, so we don't have multiple trauma Bobs or trauma Debbies. And then there's opportunity for county level oversight, and we'll discuss that really quick. But honestly, we really lucked out. This was 10 o'clock in Las Vegas, relatively empty emergency department. not flu season. People answered their phones at 10 o'clock. If this was 2 o'clock in the morning during flu season, it would have been a completely and totally different outcome. So how do we prepare for that? Those are my attention. So it's hospital area command is what we call it. So hospital area command is EMS, fire agencies, they're all awake. They all have staff. When a hospital gets overrun during something like this and they don't have the 100 doctors or the 200 nurses and ancillary staff show up, how do we utilize the space that's there? So now Southern Nevada Health District has worked with us to, if something like this were to happen, to set up an area command post within the hospitals and decide what they need. So whether they need resources, manpower, whether they need, an engine company to go get more supplies, X, Y, and Z. This was unheard of prior to the Las Vegas shooting, but this is something that we're working on and we're ironing out now. And community support. I mean,